The king of Egypt gives an order that should have made resistance almost impossible. He speaks from the throne, controls the labor of an entire people, and can turn his fear into law. Yet within the story of Israel's oppression, the first named people who resist his plan are two women whose work is done beside mothers in labor. Pharaoh is not personally named in these chapters. The midwives are Shiphrah and Puah. Exodus chapters 1 and 2 show how the descendants of Israel became slaves, how oppression escalated into an attack on their children, and how one Hebrew boy survived inside Pharaoh's own household. The story begins with a national crisis, moves into one family, and then follows that child into adulthood, failure, and exile. Genesis chapter 50 closes with Joseph dying in Egypt while trusting that God would surely come to the aid of his people, and Exodus moves to a new king who does not know Joseph. Exodus begins by naming the sons of Israel who had entered Egypt with Jacob. The household is counted as 70 persons, with Joseph already in Egypt. Then Joseph dies, his brothers die, and that entire generation passes away. The family does not disappear with them. The Israelites are fruitful, increase greatly, multiply, and become so strong that the land is filled with them. Israel is no longer merely one extended household. A people has taken shape. Their numbers could have been viewed as a source of strength for the land, but the new king interprets their presence through fear. He tells the Egyptians that the Israelites have become more numerous and more powerful than they are. Pharaoh then imagines what might happen if war comes. Israel may join Egypt's enemies, fight against Egypt, and leave the country. Exodus reports no Israelite rebellion or secret alliance. Pharaoh is acting on what he thinks they might do, treating a possible future as an urgent threat and using it to justify control in the present. His proposed solution is to deal shrewdly with them. In practice, that means forced labor. Taskmasters are appointed over the Israelites to crush them with heavy burdens, and they build the store cities of Pithom and Ramesses for Pharaoh. Their growing strength is turned toward projects that increase Pharaoh's strength. Egypt wants the labor of the Israelites while treating their continued existence as dangerous. Pharaoh needs their bodies strong enough to work, but he wants their community weak enough to control. Slavery allows Egypt to extract value from the people while trying to break their ability to live as a people. The Egyptians make the Israelites serve ruthlessly. Their lives become bitter through hard work with mortar and brick, along with every kind of labor in the fields. This is slavery carried out through orders, supervision, and force. Still, Pharaoh does not get the result he wants. The more the Israelites are oppressed, the more they multiply and spread. Their growth causes the Egyptians to dread them even more. Instead of questioning the fear behind the policy, Egypt increases the severity of the oppression. Pharaoh then summons Shiphrah and Puah, two midwives who serve the Hebrew women, and speaks to them about births. Whether the wording emphasizes their own Hebrew identity, or their work among Hebrew mothers, the story centers on the command Pharaoh gives and the choice they make. He tells them to watch as the Hebrew women give birth. If the child is a son, they must kill him. If the child is a daughter, she may live. Pharaoh is no longer trying only to weaken Israel through exhausting work. He wants the midwives to make Israel's own births serve his purpose. The command depends on their cooperation. Pharaoh can issue it, but he is not standing beside every birth. The women who receive the order must still decide what they will do when a child is born. Shiphrah and Puah fear God, and they refuse to obey the king's command. They allowed the boys to live. No public speech is recorded from either woman. Their resistance consists of refusing to perform the killing assigned to them. The fear of God shapes their decision. Pharaoh can summon and question them, but their obedience to God sets a limit on what his command can make them do. When the king requires the murder of children, the midwives refuse. Pharaoh notices that the boys are still living and calls the midwives back. He asks why they have done this. They answer that the Hebrew women are vigorous and give birth before a midwife arrives. Readers have long considered how to understand their answer. Perhaps it included a genuine observation about some of the births. Perhaps it was a carefully constructed explanation intended to conceal their resistance. The story gives no complete moral analysis of every word they speak. It tells us what governed their conduct: they feared God, and they did not kill the boys. God deals well with the midwives. The Israelites continue to multiply and become very strong, and because the midwives fear God, He gives them families or households of their own. Pharaoh ordered them to attack the households of Israel. His order fails, while their own households are established. The way the chapter handles names is worth hearing at this point. The king who commands slavery and death is known only by his title, Pharaoh. The women he tries to enlist are remembered as Shiphrah and Puah. Their names do not give them political power, but the text refuses to let their courage disappear inside the larger story of Egypt and Israel. When the midwives refuse to carry out the command, Pharaoh changes his method. He no longer speaks only to 2 women. He commands all his people to throw every Hebrew son into the Nile, while allowing every daughter to live. Until now, Pharaoh has worked through appointed taskmasters and a direct order to the midwives. The new command removes that narrow circle. Every Egyptian who hears it is being told how to treat a Hebrew boy. Violence against Israel's children is no longer confined to an instruction given behind royal doors. Pharaoh has made it a responsibility of the population. The daughters who are allowed to live are still born into an enslaved people. Their lives remain under the same system of forced labor that has made Israel's existence bitter. But Pharaoh has now marked every Hebrew son for death, and his command reaches into every Israelite home expecting a child. Exodus chapter 2 brings us inside one of those homes. A man from the house of Levi marries a Levite woman. She conceives and gives birth to a son. When she sees that he is a fine or beautiful child, she hides him for 3 months. The parents are not named in these chapters, and their conversations are not recorded. We are given their actions and the danger surrounding them. Hiding a newborn for 3 months would require constant care. The mother is resisting a command known throughout the country, but she cannot stop the child from growing. Eventually she reaches the point when she can hide him no longer. Hebrews chapter 11 reflects briefly on this scene by describing the parents' action as faith. They saw that the child was beautiful, hid him for 3 months, and were not controlled by the king's command. The danger remains present in that reading. Faith is what enables them to protect the child despite it. The mother takes a basket made of papyrus and coats it with bitumen and pitch. She places the child inside and sets the basket among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. The papyrus forms the small vessel, while the coating seals it against the water. She has brought her son to the river named in Pharaoh's decree, but she has not surrendered him to the river. The basket rests among the reeds, and the child's sister stays nearby to see what will happen. Someone is still watching when Pharaoh's daughter comes down to bathe. The princess walks toward the river while her attendants move along the bank. She sees the basket among the reeds and sends a female servant to retrieve it. When she opens the basket, she sees the child, and the boy is crying. She has compassion on him. She also recognizes him as one of the Hebrew children, so she understands that he belongs to the people targeted by her father's command. She sees who he is and chooses to receive him rather than hand him over to death. Seeing leads to very different responses in these chapters. Pharaoh looks at the growing Israelite population and responds with dread. The child's mother sees that her son is beautiful and hides him. Pharaoh's daughter sees the crying boy, recognizes that he is Hebrew, and feels compassion. The people in each scene are not lacking information. The difference lies in what fear, love, or pity leads them to do with what they see. The child's sister approaches Pharaoh's daughter and offers to find a Hebrew woman who can nurse the baby. The princess agrees, and the girl calls the child's own mother. Pharaoh's daughter tells the woman to take the child, nurse him for her, and receive wages. The mother who could no longer safely hide her son can now care for him under the protection of the princess. She is even paid to do what she had risked her life to continue doing. Pharaoh commanded Egypt to use the Nile against Hebrew sons. His own daughter finds a Hebrew son beside the Nile and protects him. Through her compassion, the royal household at the center of the danger becomes a place of safety for this particular child. When the child grows older, his mother brings him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he becomes her son. The princess names him Moses because, she says, she drew him out of the water. His name keeps the memory of his rescue from the river with him. His place in Pharaoh's household does not erase the fact that he entered it as a Hebrew child rescued from Pharaoh's command. Very little is said about the years between his adoption and his first appearance as an adult. We hear no conversations from the palace and are not told how much Moses knew about the circumstances of his birth. What remains clear is the tension around his identity. He is the son of Pharaoh's daughter, but the people enslaved by Pharaoh are still his own people. Moses grows up and goes out to look upon their burdens. Acts chapter 7 adds a short perspective on these years. It says that Moses was educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians and became powerful in words and actions. When he was about 40 years old, he decided to visit his fellow Israelites. He had been formed within Egypt, yet he remained drawn toward the people being oppressed by Egypt. Exodus calls the Hebrews his people twice within the scene. First, Moses goes out to his people and sees their burdens. Then the man being beaten is described as one of his people. The wording keeps his identification with Israel in view before Moses speaks or acts, even though he has grown up as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. He looks in both directions, and when he sees no one, he kills the Egyptian and hides the body in the sand. The suffering before him is real, but his response is a secret act of lethal violence rather than an action commanded by God. The next day Moses goes out again and finds two Hebrew men fighting. He asks the one in the wrong why he is striking his companion. The man challenges Moses' authority. "Who made you a ruler and judge over us?" He then asks whether Moses intends to kill him as he killed the Egyptian. Moses realizes that his act is known, and he becomes afraid. Pharaoh hears about it and tries to kill him. Moses flees from Pharaoh and settles in the land of Midian, where he sits down beside a well. Moses sees a real injustice, but he answers it by killing in secret and hiding the body. His concern for the Hebrew being beaten is genuine, yet the killing brings no relief to Israel. The burden remains, his own people question him, and Moses must flee. Hebrews chapter 11 later emphasizes that Moses did not allow his identity to be defined only by his place in Pharaoh's household. He chose association with the suffering people of God over the temporary advantages connected with Egypt. At the well in Midian, 7 daughters of the priest of Midian come to draw water and fill the troughs for their father's flock. Shepherds arrive and drive them away. Moses rises to help the women and waters their flock. This is the third time in a few verses that Moses encounters someone being mistreated. In Egypt, he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. The next day, he saw one Hebrew striking another. In Midian, he sees shepherds driving women away from the water they have drawn. His responses and their consequences are different, but he repeatedly steps into conflicts where someone stronger is using an advantage against someone else. The daughters later describe the event by saying that Moses rescued them from the shepherds. They also remember that he drew water for the flock. His help did not end when the aggressors were gone. He stayed long enough to complete the work the women had come to do. When the daughters returned home earlier than usual, their father, Reuel, later also known as Jethro, asks why. They answer that an Egyptian rescued them from the shepherds and even drew water for the flock. To them, Moses looks Egyptian. Exodus continues to identify him with the Hebrews, even though he has now fled from Egypt and entered Midian. Reuel asks why they left the man at the well and tells them to invite him to eat. Moses agrees to stay with Reuel, who gives his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. She gives birth to a son, and Moses names him Gershom because, as he explains, he has become a foreigner in a foreign land. The name tells us how Moses understands his condition. He has escaped Pharaoh and gained a household in Midian, but he remains a foreigner. The Hebrews are his people, yet he cannot safely remain with them. He was raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, yet Pharaoh seeks his life. The man rescued from the Nile now lives at a distance from both the royal house and the enslaved community. Exodus then returns to Egypt. A long time passes, and the king dies. His death does not end the system under which Israel suffers. The people remain in slavery, groaning under their burden and crying out for help. No individual speaker is named, and no carefully worded prayer is recorded. We hear the groaning of an enslaved people, and their cry rises to God. They do not have to arrange their suffering into an eloquent appeal before He hears them. The chapter closes by saying that God hears their groaning, remembers His covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, sees the Israelites, and knows. Those statements answer the conditions described since the beginning of the book. The people whose lives have been made bitter are heard. The covenant is remembered while a new king has forgotten Joseph. The Israelites who have been treated as a labor force and a threat are seen as people. Then the final verb gathers the scene into one brief statement: God knows. God's remembering does not mean the covenant had slipped from His mind. He turns toward the people in faithfulness to the relationship He established with them. Their cry comes from people He has not abandoned. The final statement is especially brief: God knows. Israel's circumstances have not yet changed, but their suffering has been fully recognized by God. Pharaoh looked at a growing people and imagined what they might do against him. He made their actual lives bitter because of a rebellion that had not happened. Their numbers became a reason for forced labor, and their sons became targets of a royal command. Fear can make cruelty sound reasonable when people are discussed only as a threat. Pharaoh speaks about possible war and what Israel might do. His answer is to enslave workers and order children thrown into the Nile. Shiphrah and Puah do not have the power to end Israel's slavery, but they refuse to turn birth into death. Moses' mother cannot revoke Pharaoh's command, but she protects her son with the strength she has. Pharaoh's daughter cannot lift the burden from the Hebrews, but when she opens the basket, compassion governs what she does with the child before her. None of them solves the whole crisis. Each one receives a life placed directly in front of her and refuses to surrender it to Pharaoh's fear. When Exodus chapter 2 closes, the scene remains unresolved. A king has died, Israel is still enslaved, and Moses is far away in Midian. The people have not stopped groaning, and deliverance has not yet begun. Yet their suffering is not hidden, and their cry has reached God. Pharaoh still possesses the throne, the taskmasters, the building projects, and the authority to make his command public. But he cannot force Shiphrah and Puah to kill. He cannot stop a Hebrew mother from protecting her son. He cannot prevent one condemned child from finding refuge inside his own household. That is where these chapters leave us, Israel still burdened, Moses still a foreigner, and God fully aware of the suffering that has risen before him. Subscribe to Bible Slowly if you want to keep walking through Exodus passage by passage. And in the comments, tell me which act of courage in this story stayed with you.